principles of practice in the 21. KBU, TLC, making learning fun. Vision 2023 is our vision. Beyond the chalkboard, making tech a mission. Moodle and Kaltura working while you type. Using tech to change the world is more profound than hype. Expand the learner's mind until the future gives us power. Learn how people use that tech, I'll show you in an hour. Beyond the chalkboard, moving towards a better way to teach you learn to be. Beyond the chalkboard, moving towards a better world. The stars of the TLC. Roller Polytechnic University, teaching and learning commas. Yeah.
Hello and welcome to Beyond the Chalkboard Season 3. I am your host, Dr. Gordon Cobb, and I am joined today by my colleagues, Dr. Seanna Takacs and Sarah Duncan. Say hello, you two.
Hello.
Hello.
So I'm very excited about this episode. We are talking about mindfulness and the universal design for learning. And these are both things that are very important to me as an instructor because they really play into student engagement and student wellness. And these are things that are, in particular, so important right now in the COVID era that we are teaching in. So this is going to be a really great podcast. I'm super glad that you're here to check it out.
Beyond the chalkboard.
All right, so let's get started. Maybe what I'll do is let's begin with you, Sarah. I'm going to ask you, what is mindfulness and how can it enhance learning?
Okay, thanks, Gordon. There's a very relatively well-known definition. Comes from a doctor in Massachusetts, John Kabat-Zinn, and he says that mindfulness is the awareness that arises by paying attention in a particular way in the present moment, non-judgmentally. So mindfulness is about noticing things. So I thought we might start with a really quick little mindfulness practice. This is called the 3-minute breathing space. And I'll just invite the two of you and all our listeners to take a moment to participate. So just finding a comfortable place to sit. We can do this seated. Put your hands in your lap if that's comfortable. If you'd like, you can close your eyes or you can leave them open. Both are fine. And we'll just take a moment to be aware of our current situation. What is happening for you right now? What thoughts, emotions, body sensations might be coming up for you right now? And just noticing them. Not trying to push them away or analyze them, just recognizing them. The second step to this breathing space is to narrow our attention to our inner world and focus on our breathing. So noticing, where do you feel the breath coming into your body and going out of your body? Might be at the nostrils or in the chest or in the lower abdomen. And just taking a couple of breaths, noticing that particular spot. And the final step of this breathing practice is to expand our awareness to the entire body, bringing our attention to the contact points where we have our feet on the floor, you're sitting in the chair, any sensations your body is feeling. And again, noticing what's happening for you right now without trying to change it or fix it. And as we shift out of this practice, if your eyes were closed, you can open them. You can reorient your gaze to the room that you're in. Maybe stretch a little bit, move a little bit the way your body would like to. And that's a really quick introduction to mindfulness. And mindfulness doesn't have to be sitting with your eyes closed, right? There's lots of different kinds of experiences that mindfulness encompasses. And I think we're going to talk more about that today.
That was great. I feel so relaxed.
That was so great. What a nice way to start a podcast.
It was, yeah. It's so funny because, like for most of the podcast, I was focused predominantly on the giant zit that appeared just in time for today's podcast. Because, it is the end of the term, so like if you're not breaking through, you're not breaking out. Yeah, end of term, marking, stress, COVID, moving, oh my goodness. Yeah, so, it kind of got me away from being insecure or aware of silly things like a zit, and it got me into my body and into my breath, and it made me smile and feel relaxed.
Oh, that's wonderful. And that's the kind of thing you can do at any moment when you are feeling like that, because as you mentioned, there's so much going on for everybody. This is 3 minutes, right? Not even 3 minutes. And you can just ground yourself, drop yourself into your body, and it brings you back to this moment, which is essentially all we have.
Yes, it makes me miss hugs. I feel like hugging someone right now, but of course we're not allowed. So, alas. Thank you for that, Sarah. That was awesome. I think at the beginning of every faculty meeting, we should all be mandated to do 3 minutes of mindfulness. You heard it here first on Beyond the Chalkboard. Okay, well, let's keep this. I feel like I could just like make a cup of tea and chat with you both right now, but we got to keep this like moving forward. So I'm going to be a good host, and I'm gonna maybe ask another question. So Seanna, let's talk about the Universal Design for Learning. So what is the Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, and what's the UDL framework, and how does it help to facilitate mindfulness?
Right. So now I feel very relaxed, and, having reflected on, what a peaceful day it is and how happy I am to be here. Now I have to I have to turn it on and get back into the technical. So Universal Design for Learning, it's really grown out of this concern over students being excluded from the regular sort of education stream. And it really relies on a lot of psychological research, neuroscientific research, and basically the idea is once we started to think about how to include students in the curriculum, and to design curriculum in different ways, we started to see that one of the best things that we can do is support students in becoming expert learners. And there's a bunch of ways that we can do that. So an expert learner is someone who's able to reflect on their learning, who is able to understand, why they're there, what's meaningful, how to solicit help, that sort of thing. So that's the main goal of the Universal Design for Learning framework. It focuses on considering educational barriers for students and how to include those students through design, through curriculum design. And there are three components in the UDL framework. The first one is engagement, which is mainly what we're going to be focusing on around mindfulness. So engagement is, just as the name suggests, it's, how are you becoming interested in something? How are you maintaining focus? A key piece is, what do you do when the content gets difficult, or you're having a hard time in class, or you're struggling in any way? How do you persevere? How do you self-regulate? There are those sorts of pieces of the engagement aspect of the framework. There are two other aspects of the framework that I'll just mention really briefly. The second one is a representation. So how are students representing knowledge? How are they coming to the learning space? How are they coming to the content? Is it through audio, video? Are they writing? Are they discussing? So how are they representing the information? And then the last one is action and expression. So how are students demonstrating their learning? How are they demonstrating their knowledge? This is really kind of new. This kind of idea of how can mindfulness play into engagement? I guess it's both a really old idea and also a really new idea in terms of how it would be applied in higher ed, and that's kind of the discussion Sarah and I have been having. It's how does this look in the classroom? And, it can support students, it can support faculty, it can support this idea of having a classroom ecology. And I guess we'll talk about this more, but, how can mindfulness support engagement? There's all sorts of ideas on how it can support engagement, from maintaining that sort of focus to really creating, that Gordon and I both described, creating that sense of like peacefulness, and Gordon, I think what you said, I just feel like having a cup of tea and a nice chat with friends, that's really, really key. I feel the same way. So you imagine that sort of feeling transposed into the classroom, what that does for students, what that does for creating community, what that does for the instructor, so those are the really neat pieces. That's where it's such a cool, interesting mashup with mindfulness and UDL. And, I think that's what we want to keep exploring. I think we've got a kind of a neat nugget here that, again, is both very old and also very new.
Well, and as you know, Seanna, the design of season 3 of Beyond the Chalkboard was inspired by UDL practice, in that, last season I did just a podcast version that you can listen to, and then you and I have been doing a little bit of exploration around different aspects of the UDL learning framework, and so I had this idea that, we should take a multimodal approach to creating the podcast, and why not do a webisode as well? So now, with the webisode, I can put things like captions at the bottom, or I can highlight ideas that I think are really important using images or text. And now Beyond the Chalkboard has become not just a podcast, but also a webisode series. So there's just so many ways that UDL can change the way that you think about education, whatever that education may be to you. And so maybe, why don't we bring both of these worlds together, and I'll ask you both a question. So how does mindfulness support the development of engagement in the classroom?
Yeah, Sarah, do you want to, because you have such neat ideas on how that looks in the classroom.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I was telling Seanna a story that happened to me many years ago. I was with a group on a trip, and the trip was nearly over, and we were all together in the room, and the facilitator, the leader of the group, said, "Oh, I'm not sure if everybody here has been engaged with our experiences." And then he singled me out and said, "Oh, but Sarah, you haven't been speaking a lot or contributing a lot." And that, really has stuck with me, because I'm an introvert. I like to think. I'm contemplating. I'm fully engaged, but I'm not the student who's sitting there with their hand up, answering every single question, or, volunteering to go to the front of the room. So, I think there's a bit of a misnomer around this idea of what does engagement look like. And mindfulness is being engaged with your current situation, and then allows you that space to focus on, what else is happening. It allows you to recalibrate, right, and realign, and then, you're part of what's happening in the classroom. So we started off today with a little practice, and I've been doing that in my classes, and it's great for the students. I've gotten great feedback from them, but it's also important for me as the teacher to become present with my students. So that's just a couple of examples of how it can impact the classroom in a very easy way.
And if I can follow up on that, I think it's really interesting. It's really, when we think about engagement, there's this there's this sort of assumption that engagement has to do with that kind of like rapt attention and participation, and having lots to say and making connections and putting your hand up, and all of that sort of stuff. And I think that when we look at mindfulness, and we it helps us look at engagement as something that can be quiet and contemplative. And so when I work with instructors, when I'm doing consultations on UDL, and instructors say, well, no one's talking and no one's saying anything, and it's this dreadful, crushing silence, it gives us a way of saying, well, maybe it's not dreadful and crushing. Maybe it's quiet, and it's contemplative, and maybe there can be space to have that quiet contemplation. And I think that's a really neat piece about having a mindfulness frame, is to say, just as you've mentioned, Sarah, it's like, well, maybe my thoughts are introverted. Maybe I'm keeping them and hanging on to them for a little while, and sort of working on them in my own space, in a mindful space. And I think that's really, it's helpful to to kind of take a second look at what engagement might be, but it's also supportive of instructors who may be panicking that people aren't shooting their hands up to participate, that sometimes quietly listening and taking it all in means that students are highly engaged, right? So it sort of expands the scope, I guess, of what might count as engagement. So that's a neat piece.
Yeah, and the other thing I was thinking is, we know pedagogically that reflective practice is so critical to developing and solidifying learning, and this is a reflective practice, right? It's mindfulness has just such a different term, but that habit, that skill that you can develop to be a reflective learner or a reflective teacher, is fostered by being more mindful.
It's so interesting. I'm my artist brain is just exploding like fireworks right now. A couple things come to mind for me. The first is, as a composer, as a music person, there is no music without silence. If all you have is just like noise, music needs to breathe, and what makes the music breathe is the moments of silence in between. And if you're thinking of visual arts, it's like you need negative space. Otherwise, you don't have you're not taking a holistic approach to composition without the negative space. So I think perhaps most of us tend to think, like, if I don't see my students having fun and expressing themselves constantly throughout class, and they're not engaged. But that's obviously not true. There's, this makes us understand that there is a more holistic approach, a more well-rounded approach, or a more yin-yang approach to teaching, where the moments of silence and contemplation are just as important as, like, the hands going up and the students smiling and laughing and talking to each other. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I was thinking was, when I've been involved in performance groups, like small choirs or whatever, and a lot of the actors that I know, one of the things that performers often do right before you go out onto stage is you get in a circle, you join hands, and someone takes you through what is, I now understand, to be a mindful practice. So usually one person will actually, like, bring the energy down and talk about, grounding your feet and feel roots growing into the earth, and feel your breath and get into your body. And that's how we get focused before we go out onto the stage and kill it. You know what I mean? So it's interesting coming from the world of fine arts, performing arts practitioner into the world of academia, because I'm constantly discovering theoretical frameworks, philosophies that sort of back up what I've been doing instinctively all these years as an artist. And that's what's so exciting for me to be in a university setting, is I keep finding these new languages to talk about what I know to be true. And so this is indeed a very exciting conversation for me.
It is. It's such a cool frontier. Like it's, like I don't, even though I'm, a UDL expert, it's kind of like it, when in the conversation Sarah and I have been having about mindfulness, I've had that same experience. It's just, it's really brought to light all of these paradoxes and all these assumptions that we have around engagement. And it's made me go back to a lot of my own experiences with mindfulness, my own experiences in classes, my own experiences and groundedness, sort of the work I'm doing supporting faculty, reassuring folks that it's okay to take time, that it's okay to take space, and especially in the pandemic, there's with the stress and with the anxiety, there has to be so much more grounding work, and sort of a return to your values and a return to yourself, and a turning inward, at least for a little while. And I think especially as faculty, it's kind of like you're just going with your hair on fire all the time, right? Like marking emails, what can we do better? What can we do differently? Like people are really, really, really working hard, and sometimes taking that time to turn inward and to check in with yourself and your values, and feeling those roots growing through your feet, kind of thing. Like that's it's so evocative, that image. Sometimes it's kind of, there's no time for that. I have to do this. And, again, seeing that is it's just so crucial. That's what's breathing life, right? That's what's it's those sorts of practices that get us through these times of stress. So there's a real, and I think we'll probably talk about that later around wellness, but it's just such a key aspect of wellness. There's so much concern about mental health for students, for everyone. And I just think, this is where, my own brain is sort of on fire thinking, there's just so many different ways that mindfulness helps us rethink a lot of our pedagogy and a lot of our approach to wellness.
And that's the perfect segue, Seanna, into my second to last question for you guys, which is like, how does mindfulness as a tool for engagement impact both student well-being and the learning outcomes of your course?
Well, I think Seanna's really alluded to this about well-being. I mean, we know from, there's thousands now of research studies on mindfulness. It's burgeoning, and we know that it helps with self-regulation, co-regulation, wellness. Some people say happiness, although that's a nebulous term. But we know from MRIs and brain scans that the brains of people who practice mindfulness change and are different and are, and they report a greater capacity for well-being. And I think if we could give that to our students and our colleagues, wouldn't we have a much happier world? Really, it isn't just about, oh, I'm going to sit on my cushion and close my eyes and breathe for a while, right? The better that we are, the more well we are, we can then bring that into our world, right? And teachers, we have such a huge influence on our students that I think the more grounded we are, the better we can be when we come to the classroom. So I think it's the circle of wellness that just can keep growing, and it helps people learn about themselves, right? I mean, the noticing part that we talked about at the very beginning, things can come up during the course of a moment in meditation or a moment of mindfulness, and it allows you to examine that and not just react to it. And so it creates an opportunity for people to respond more thoughtfully to their lives. So yeah, social emotional learning, emotional intelligence, all of these aspects are sort of baked into all the different ways that you can practice mindfulness.
And I think, Sarah, you were saying too that you've had a bunch of students, like a number of students who've come back to you, really excited about the mindfulness piece in your classes, and they just found it super helpful.
Yeah, very much so. And I actually posted a little YouTube video of that practice that we did at the very beginning. And I've had students who have COVID or their families have COVID, and they've come back to me and said, oh yeah, I'm doing that practice every day. I'm going back and I'm looking at that every day. So there's a tiny thing you can do in your classroom that can have huge ripple effects.
Amazing. So why don't we wrap this one up? If KPU faculty or any of our millions of fans outside of KPU want to learn more about mindfulness or the Universal Design for Learning, what sorts of resources would you suggest?
Well, I'm going to do a little shameful self-promotion.
Yes.
I'm going to be leading 3 more workshops. So it'll be May 20th, May 27th, and May 31st here at KPU, of course, on Zoom. And you don't have to be an experienced meditator. You can be a total beginner. Come to any or all. And you'll see those on today at KPU. So keep your eyes out for that and come and join us. Or you can email me.
All right. And Dr. Takacs?
Well, so if you're interested in following up, Sarah and I did an interview for the blog that I run UDL at KPU. So that's where we first had our initial talks, and I first, was very excited, and as I wrote in the blog, to formally sort of dip a toe into mindfulness and engagement in the UDL framework. So you can find that on UDL at KPU. If you're interested in learning more about universal design for learning at KPU, there's a bunch of blog posts that I've written on Friday Morning Coffee, which is the Teaching and Learning Commons blog. And then if you're interested in finding out more, there's lots and lots of resources. I put together with a colleague at the Justice Institute, we did a module on UDL for BC Campus, which you can look up. And yeah, you can give me a call. There's all sorts of resources. The CAST group in the US. There's the Include Collaboratory. So there's lots and lots and lots of resources on UDL. And it's my hope that, this sort of piece on mindfulness, UDL, wellness, that we'll continue working on this. If you have other ideas on this, please get in touch with Sarah or me. And yeah, we'd love to talk about it more. It's ripe for development and growth, and all sorts of interesting stuff is afoot. So please get in touch by all means.
And perhaps, I'll just shamelessly plug the blog post that Seanna and I put together around the action and expression component of the UDL framework, which is also on the Friday Morning Coffee blog site, and it's super sassy and fun.
Absolutely.
Okay, any final words, ladies?
Well, I would just like to say thanks for having us. I'm just so pleased that we could do this. And I'm really glad that we've had the opportunity to just have a really good chat and to kind of, they're new ideas and kind of new directions. And it's nice to be able to kind of play in the sandbox. So thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much, Gordon. And yeah, it's wonderful to see such supportive colleagues and have that opportunity to chat about this. So, I really hope to hear from people in the future and see you at the workshops and hopefully spread some mindfulness.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure that our audience has as well. And this is the final episode of Beyond the Chalkboard Season 3. So I want to thank everybody for joining us for this experimental season in the COVID era, in the Universal Design for Learning enhanced era of Beyond the Chalkboard. And we will be sure to list all of the resources that Sarah and Seanna mentioned in the notes section of the podcast and the webisode. So thank you, Sarah and Seanna, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll see you online.
Defining principles of practice in the 21. KBU, TLC, making learning fun. Vision 2023 is our vision. Beyond the Chalkboard, making tech a mission. Moodle and Kaltura working while you type. Using tech to change your world is more profound than hype. Expand the learner's mind into the future gives us power. Learn how people use that tech, I'll show you in an hour. Beyond the Chalkboard, moving towards a better way to teach you, learn to be. Beyond the Chalkboard, moving towards a better world that starts with the TLC. Polytechnic University, teaching and